welcome back to the Lonestar Collective Podcast, the official podcast of the Texas Cannabis Collective. I am joined this week by our very special guest and newest board member to the Texas Cannabis Collective, Shaun Salvaje. Welcome, Shaun. How are you doing?
Hi, Gramps. I'm doing good today. I'm so happy to be here with you guys.
I'm glad to finally get you on the show so we can introduce you to our listeners and our followers and let them learn a little bit more about you and what your position is here and, what all your plans are for the future. Your title is Texas Cannabis Collective's Director of Veterans Affairs, which you're also a board member. So we welcome you to the Texas Cannabis Collective. We're very excited to have you with us. I know Austin and I both are. Please introduce yourself to our listeners and our audience and tell us a little bit about your background, the fact that you are a veteran yourself and that history, and a little bit about just where you come from.
All right. Well, I come from Texas. So I'm a native daughter of Texas. I like to make this joke that my family was so dramatic. They started in the valley in the tip of McAllen, and they're so dramatic they had to go all the way up to Hereford. So I have some family in the valley, and I have some family all the way up in the Panhandle in Hereford. And I myself, I'm based out of Austin, Texas. So, and I am coming to the Texas Cannabis Collective as the Veteran Affairs Director, having served almost 13 years in the Air Force as a combat photographer and military correspondent. After my time in the Air Force as a photojournalist, I was a communications strategist for the Pentagon in New York. And then from there, I transitioned out and decided to make the move. I left New York and decided to come home to try to help legalize Texas. This was before New York had legalized. Or they're in the process of doing that. So, Well, of course, I'm sad that I missed the boat on New York and a couple other legal states where I had opportunities. It really meant something to me to come back to Texas to do the advocacy work here. I think Texas is going to be one of the key states when it comes to the industry in the future. And I know that while we may be, unfortunately, it may look like we might be last to the legalization table, that when we do make that flip, Texas is a key influencer when it comes to the economic status of certain policies in the U.S. and the social status of policies. So I'm hoping that we can do the good work, plant the good seeds, and make the cannabis industry in Texas whole and strong. So that way, when we are on top of the table and things do flip, we are ready to lead the way. We haven't exactly seen the kind of leadership that I would hope to see out of California or New York, although we were optimistic about both. So I'm hoping Texas will pull through coming down the middle. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, we've been pulling for Texas for a long time, but things have kind of stalemated in the last session, which there's a lot of reasons for that. We've talked about that on previous episodes where, the whole property tax battle to how to property tax relief and whatnot kind of stifled a lot of things. And of course, as everybody should understand, in Texas politics, cannabis is one of those back burner things, right? It comes last, basically. So, but, we keep trying to push the encouraging thought process that while we didn't get any ground gaining movement this past session, we didn't go backwards in any respects either in terms of the hemp market and the products that are available in Texas, so there's that positive way to look at it. I always try to tell everybody there's a silver lining in every cloud. You just got to dig deep enough to find it, right? At any rate, so
especially when it comes to legalization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know without having, a ballot initiative process available to us here in Texas, like they did in Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington, et cetera. We're faced with doing it the legislative way, right? And sometimes that means extreme baby steps. And of course, unfortunately, all we've been able to do in that category has been, number one, the medical program, as limited as it is here in Texas. And number two, the very many decriminalization efforts, local decriminalization efforts that I'm speaking of across the state of Texas that as a organization we have been involved with and supporting, and we will continue to do so. My question is, of course, being that you're the new director of Veterans Affairs, I'm sure being a veteran yourself, and of course, it's interesting being a photographer. I did photography for many, many years back when the old SLR cameras and whatnot with 35 millimeter film and, before the digital age. And it's interesting that you got to do in a military setting. That's I never got to do. That's kind of interesting to me. But with your military background and obviously you got to travel around the world and see lots of different things. You got to experience a lot of different things with your fellow veterans as they occurred, right? Different scenarios and whatnot.
Yeah. So when you're the combat photographer, essentially you're attaching to individual units. And so what we like to say is we get to try a little bit of every job every day. So I attach to a different unit. I get to see what they do. I get to document what they do, provide the American public with a level of awareness of what their military is doing truly on the ground. Only if they're willing to actually look, though. So the public has to be interested in the education to know what's going on. And that's also part of the challenge with cannabis legislation is it's not for lack of want. The people clearly want it. It's for lack of understanding how can we move this needle forward and how can we do it with legislators across both aisles, whether it's conservative policy or more liberal leaning policy. We want to find a middle ground that works for the patients and the people who need the plant the most, because that's at the end of the day what really matters. So, but yeah,
Absolutely.
you get a little sample of this and a little sample of that. You come at the end of the day. I think the biggest lesson that I learned, having witnessed a slice of life from each aspect of the field, is that at the end of the day, it is all of our small pieces that come together to create the big puzzle, to create the bigger machinery of movement and change and community. So don't give up faith, especially if you're an advocate out there, that your small piece or small contribution doesn't add up. All those small pieces together create, like we say, they create a collective. So, and it really is about coming together in the ways that you can, do what you can with what you have, when you can, where you can, and then we compound on that.
Absolutely. I was going to ask, or kind of where I was at is with your experiences being in those military environments and whatnot, you can attest, obviously, to the need of our veterans for a medicine like medicinal cannabis, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, even for myself, for a period of time when I was in New York, I was a military broadcaster. Communicating was a part of my professional development. It was part of my career. It was part of my identity. I was a professional communicator. When I had come home from Afghanistan, I had begun experiencing significant migraines, things that I almost liken them to psychedelic experiences, but that's for a whole nother conversation. And if it wasn't for cannabis, so what at the time they had NYU doctors, because I was in New York, so I got to go to the best in New York, went to NYU, stumped the neurologists, and they explained to me, Shaun, there's a whole lot that we still don't know about the human brain, which kind of blew my mind because I thought we were so far ahead in Western medicine. And they had prescribed a number of pills that they thought would help me. But what ended up happening is I actually ended up losing speech entirely, which for me was kind of a huge identity crisis, having been a professional communicator. And now I'm in New York. I'm a single mom. That's how I make my livelihood. That's how I communicate on behalf of the Pentagon. And I don't have words aren't coming out of my mouth. And the ones that are, I'm stuttering or I'm getting them wrong. There's a lot of confusion. So I knew that pharmaceuticals were not going to be the solution for me. I was really resistant before. I wanted to try them to see if it would be a potential solution, but it wasn't something that worked for me. So I went back to tried and true and under the table, even while I was, and I'm retired now. So you still have you worry about getting in trouble once you've been in the military, you're just constantly worried, like, is the commander coming? Looking over your shoulder. But at the time, under the radar, I was consuming cannabis, and it was the only thing that was helping to make things better. And that's when I knew it was time to allow the Air Force to retire me out. It was time to let that, because I had resisted for so many years. It was time to let that process happen. It was time to take the fight back to the streets, back to our domestic policy instead of looking at international policy and war fighting. It was time to look at the war at home and the fight for our veterans to get medical access to this plant, which has so few negative side effects, especially when we look at it in comparison to pharmaceutical drugs. Not saying that there isn't a place or time for that kind of medical care, but it shouldn't be our first resort.
Absolutely.
And it shouldn't be the first resort for veterans who are really struggling with issues that require so much more than just a prescription and, hey, doc, here's your script, and a bye, doc. That's what was happening for a long time, was just writing out scripts for pain pills that were creating this opioid crisis that we're facing now. So to fight this fight at home and to try to make things right is really the top of my concern as the VA director for the Texas Cannabis Collective, to bring more awareness out there for veterans, to let them know, hey, in Texas, we do have a medical program. And it's not as robust as other states. It's not everything that we want it to be, but it's here and it's a start, and we can get you access. And so that is going to be my core focus for this year.
And it is helping veterans.
Absolutely.
I know several veterans that it is. With that being said, we're going to have to get ready to take a sponsor break right quick. But when we get back, I want to dive into kind of what you were touching base on there. Let's dive into a little bit more about what your plans are as the Veterans Affairs Director for TCC, and what future plans are, and maybe some of our involvement as TCC with the Veterans for Medical Cannabis organization and their plans they have for opening day. I know you're privy to that probably coming up for opening day of the session in 2025 and all that good stuff when we get back after this break. So we're going to do that right quick. We're going to take a quick sponsor break. And when we get back, we're going to dive into some of Shaun's plans for veterans events and whatnot, and some collaborations we have coming up right after this.
Howdy, Colt Power here. These days, many people are choosing to add CBD to their wellness routine. Why? Some like CBD for how it may help them with their focus. Others enjoy the way the plant compound may assist them with their sore muscles and relaxation. For me, CBD has been a game changer in keeping my old sports injuries managed so I can work out and be present for my family. If you've ever been curious about CBD, I invite you to check out our Texas-grown, Texas-made products at powerbiopharms.com. Power, BIOPHARMS.com.
Thrive Apothecary offers an experience truly unique from anything else in Texas. A full-service cannabis solution that is doctor-owned and offers customers every level of cannabis legally available in Texas. From traditional CBD products to emerging hemp-derived THC edibles, smokables, and now medical cannabis. As a licensed medical cannabis provider, prospective patients from anywhere in Texas can book a sponsored online eligibility consultation to determine if they qualify for a medical marijuana prescription from the comfort of their own home. Plus, for Texas veterans, their first prescription appointment is donated by Thrive. Visit thrivetx.com for more information.
Welcome back to the Lonestar Collective Podcast, the official podcast of the Texas Cannabis Collective, distributed on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and many more, to give Texans information regarding policy, industry, and culture. And now, back to this week's show.
Back to the Lonestar Collective, the official podcast of the Texas Cannabis Collective. I'm your host, Chris Crisolia, and I am joined this week by our very special guest, Shaun Salvaje. Welcome back, Shaun.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Shaun, as we were talking about, is our new Director of Veterans Affairs here at the Texas Cannabis Collective. And right before we went to the break, we started talking about maybe what some of your plans are for veterans organizations and getting involved, and how we can maybe garner more of the veteran support for this movement while we prepare for the 2025 session. So kind of give us a little breakdown of what your thoughts are on how we can do those things.
Well, I think one thing we really want to try this year is a lot more in regards to outreach, especially here in the city of Austin. We have a pretty strong presence in Dallas and in other cities. And what I really want to do is use this opportunity. Well, I'm here in the Capital Metro area. So to use this opportunity to do more outreach events, to bring more veterans together in connection, necessarily just with cannabis, but more so with each other, and to see how can we contribute to creating positive change communities, whether it's related to cannabis or not. And then having that secondary conversation of, hey, I know that this is affecting me. Are you also being affected by these symptoms? And I'm talking about PTSD and depression, anxiety, all of these other things, because the reality is when it comes to our veterans, none of us want a handout, okay? None of us are going to go to an event to try to get help because we're usually in the space where we're wanting to help others. So I really want to tap into that. The reality is our veterans are far more capable than most people realize. They're incredible leaders. They've got incredible gifts and they have skills that have been honed by time of war and crisis, which, in times like these that we're facing right now, these are skill sets that are really desperately needed by so many, but not just, I think a lot of times we think of these skill sets as being something applicable to business or professional lives, but it can also be really applicable to community building, which is, I think, one of the first things for many veterans. They feel a call to serve others. So I want to tap into that. I want to tap into this call to service. We're going to be doing more community-oriented, more service-oriented projects. And we're going to start with this November. We have an event at the Bob Bullock Museum with Good Blend. So we're partnering with Good Blend, and the service is having that conversation, connecting with one another, and just beginning that dialogue, veteran to veteran. So we're going to do a panel at the Bob Bullock Museum at the Spirit of Texas Theater, which I feel really honored to be having this conversation. If you had told me when I was 18 years old and I first visited the Bob Bullock Museum, if you would have told me that I'd be speaking at the Bob Bullock Museum and hosting a panel on veterans and cannabis, I would have laughed. I would have never thought, because in Texas, at least, 18 years ago, I don't want to age myself too much, but maybe I was 18 years ago. But in those days, you didn't talk about it. It was secret. It was very negative. There was a lot of negative bias and a lot of negative stigma. Even just 5 years ago, there was a lot of negative stigma. And it seems that since the pandemic, people are more willing to be open and vulnerable and honest with what they're actually experiencing and what's really working for them. I want to tap into that. So we're having this event at the Bob Bullock Museum. Of course, civils are invited, but we really are hoping to do more with our military veteran community. And Good Blend is giving away 100 free medical recommendations for military veterans or military veterans, retirees, anyone who wants a recommendation who has military status will be able to receive information, and at least 100 people will be able to receive free recommendations, which is huge. And I just can't believe that Good Blend is doing this. So that's November 9th here in Austin, Texas at the Bob Bullock Museum. If you follow me on Instagram and you hit the link in my bio, I'm at highly.informed, ENFORMED. We can explain why it's highly informed. I'll do that later. But if you hit that link in bio, otherwise we'll have one at the Texas Cannabis Collective somewhere. I want to get it to the audience. I don't know how. I'm new. I'm the newest member, so they're going to have to forgive me as I give ourselves assignments for where we can put up links, and Sheriff Gramps is going to educate me. So we're doing that. We're going to give away 100 free recommendations. And so we've got a few Veterans Day events, but what I'm really excited about leading up to the Ledge is getting out there. I want to do routine meetings with the community. I want to have routine meetings with our veterans here in Austin. I want to have routine meetings with veterans in Houston and DFW, out in Lubbock. And I want to gauge for the pulse of the people and what veterans are seeing in their communities, because the veterans are paying attention. They know they care about their home. They've already volunteered to raise their hands to sacrifice for. It's very clear that veterans care about their community. So I want to get a pulse on what's really going on out there so we can figure out, okay, let's sit with the legislators and really talk to them about what their constituents and their community members are telling us they want to see. Because I feel like that's the kind of leadership we're going to have to start to approach running the United States and states. Each individual state, we're going to have to start participating in our governance in this way. We're seeing that things are kind of falling apart left and right, whether no matter what party you're affiliated with, left or right. And It's just got to a state where we need to really start to come together to have critical dialogues and conversations about how we want to move policy forward. And that policy's got to be based on a grassroots level of the experience of the people. And I think that's where we're missing a lot, where legislators are maybe falling out of touch. And if I can be a bridge to help connect them, much like cannabis, cannabinoids are a bridge plant. They help connect different pathways in your brain with different medicines. Much like cannabis, I want to be a bridge for the people. So if I can find a way to be a bridge to get the voice and the will of the people, get it organized into an idea, hear from our veterans on a collective level, which is really the big goal for 2024. Then I know that we can be ready for that 2025 legislative session with way more, data. I want to have heart-centered data that we can use to drive the point home to our legislators so that they can see legalizing and decriminalizing cannabis doesn't just make financial sense for Texas. It makes sense in the ways of healing the people and empowering new economic opportunities for Texans. I'm really big on finding out how we can empower our community, through Texans, by Texans, for Texas, because that's just the Texas way of doing things. We're just all about Texas. Can I say Texas again? Texas.
Yeah, Texas.
We're just trying to figure out how to get us all together. Yes, but we got to be for Texas all together now. That means all of us. We're bringing everyone to the table to have these conversations. So I think that's my big focus for 2024. I want to hear from everybody. I want to hear from everyone, all sides of the table, what's happening in your community and how can I help? And what can I tell your legislators that you want to see more of?
Yeah, absolutely. I love your enthusiasm. Talking about getting people involved, and that's been one of my big theen because you see all these polls, and I've only been involved in this, which some people say this is a long time. I've only been involved in this movement since 2016 after losing this guy behind me to epilepsy, and he refused to break the law to try cannabis when medicines seemed to only make his seizures worse. And he was 23 years old at the time, so I couldn't, force him. It was his decision. And as a father, what do you do when he says, "Dad, I don't want to break the law"? I mean, what do you say? You raise them to be law-abiding citizens, right? But at any rate, 2016 till now, it's not really that long a time, but it's a pretty good amount of time. And like you said, you couldn't really get the involvement in conversation like you did prior to COVID. But even still then, back in 2016, up until now, all the polls have repeatedly said the same things. 80% of the people say expand to full medical. 67% of the Texas population says just legalize it already. So how do we get that 67% more involved and more vocal so that the politicians in Austin hear them, right? That being said, we're going to have to take another sponsor break, but that's kind of what I want to go into when we come back. How do we get, because 67% of Texas is a lot of people. So when we come back from the sponsor break, that's what I want to dive into. So we're going to go to a quick sponsor break, folks. And when we get back, that's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of dive into the fact that 67% of Texas consistently say they're for legalizing. So how do we get them involved? right after this.
Howdy, Colt Power here. These days, many people are choosing to add CBD to their wellness routine. Why? Some like CBD for how it may help them with their focus. Others enjoy the way the plant compound may assist them with their sore muscles and relaxation. For me, CBD has been a game changer in keeping my old sports injuries managed so I can work out and be present for my family. If you've ever been curious about CBD, I invite you to check out our Texas-grown, Texas-made products at powerbiofarms.com. That's power, OPHARMS.com.
Thrive Apothecary offers an experience truly unique from anything else in Texas. A full-service cannabis solution that is doctor-owned and offers customers every level of cannabis legally available in Texas. From traditional CBD products to emerging hemp-derived THC edibles, smokables, and now medical cannabis. As a licensed medical cannabis provider, prospective patients from anywhere in Texas can book a sponsored online eligibility consultation to determine if they qualify for a medical marijuana prescription from the comfort of their own home. Plus, for Texas veterans, the first prescription appointment is donated by Thrive. Visit thrivetx.com for more information.
Welcome back to the Lonestar Collective Podcast, the official podcast of the Texas Cannabis Collective, distributed on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and many more, to give Texans information regarding policy, industry, and culture. And now, back to this week's show.
Hello, and welcome back to the Lonestar Collective, the official podcast of the Texas Cannabis Collective. I'm your host, Chris Grisolia, and I'm joined this week by our very special guest, Shaun Salvaje, our newest member of the board here at Texas Cannabis Collective, as well as our Director of Veterans Affairs. Welcome back, Shaun.
Hello. Thank you for having me back. This is great.
I'm glad to have you, where we introduce you to our audience and our public and get your name out there and your ideas out there. Before we went to the last break, I was enjoying listening to your enthusiasm about getting people involved and organizing and making things happen, because that gives me hope. Because like I said before we went to the break, there are consistently in all the polls 65 to 69%, an average of 67% say they're for full-blown legalization. This is Texas citizens in these polls. And at our best events on days in Austin during session and whatnot in previous years, we've had maybe 450 people tops. When you think in terms of 67%, just for perspective, and I know people are probably tired of me bringing this up on the show, but I can't help it. 67% of the Texas population is over 19 million people. Do you not understand that if we could get just 1% of that to show up in Austin, and that doesn't mean in person, that means emails, phone calls, and in person, just 1% of that 19 million people plus would end this conversation, in my opinion. What do you think?
A little bit, because it reminds me of my own attitude before I started participating in the legislative process. So even having in the military, I'll be very honest. I'm sure this is why a lot of veterans stay away, is that we become a little jaded by the bureaucracy of all of this. And I think the American people and Texans they're at that level too, where they don't really think that they can impact change. Getting people to show up for an event or to protest or to speak to their legislators or to participate in the legislative session, it's difficult. We already have a hard time getting people to show up to vote. And I think it's because people have become so disenfranchised with the entire process, whether it's a presidential election or the legislative session and talking about which policies are going to rule our lives. And it seems to be a thing that we're experiencing now, where we're learning that if we're not going to participate in our own governance, then the governance shall happen for us. And you would be surprised, though, as upset as we can get as a public when things are going sideways, it still surprises me to this day. And, you remind me with your question that I felt the same way until I showed up to start having those conversations with my legislators. And then I found how having that direct conversation really does become influential. And so participating in the process does actually influence what your legislators do, because at the end of the day, they are concerned about not just rule. Some of them are genuinely concerned about creating fair policy. I'm not gonna lambast everyone. But some of them are interested in making sure they win an election because it's in their own best interest and it's part of their career plan. And I'm just gonna call it a spade a spade. I'm a Texas woman. We seem to have a problem with doing this kind of thing. Love us or hate us for it. I hope that y'all will love it, but some of them are career politicians and they are looking out for their votes. And so they're interested in knowing what you will vote for. But if we don't communicate it, then the only person who's really talking to your legislator is the lobbyist. So they're the only ones with the vote because they're the only ones paying folks to be there in your legislator's space to have those conversations. So it's on us, we the people, to get up and start having the conversations too. And I have to, I think, at this stage of our amazed sometimes we're still such a young democracy. We're so young in history, just in general, human history. We're still learning how to do this. We're still learning how to do it. And with all the division that we're facing, it's very clear we are going through a growth cycle that is going to have a lot of hiccups. It's like our teenage years. And we've got some crazy shit popping off and we're a little down, but we can grow through it. We just have to actually show up, put in the work and evaluate the process, the system, and the policies we're creating. But that requires the people who are motivated enough to show up. How do we become motivated enough to show up? Well, the thing that I learned in the military is that the way to motivate the junior enlisted folks or people, the bulk, the majority of the people who actually get the work is to show them that their work and their voice has meaning, that your voice has meaning and it carries purpose and it can be very powerful, but only if you use it. So I think that's how we get that number to change, but that requires a cultural shift that I think is actually really possible, especially being here in Austin. It's been really amazing to me to watch this little social bubble that has been created because we have people from New York and we have people from LA and we have Rogan here. Like the 6 degrees of separation in Austin right now is insane. And it means that, and with people and media, like social media and conversations and dialogues happening more frequently at a grassroots level, it means we have a unique opportunity to actually create change. And if it can happen in Austin, I've seen it happen in cities like Austin. I can see it happening in cities like New York. You can see it happening in major metropolitans. And of course it can happen at the grassroots level, because as a Texan, I also have to consider, like right now, if we're getting any choppy signal, it's because I'm out at the ranch and we're in a rural area, and you have to think about these kinds of things, different kind of living, different way of living, different philosophy, but two styles that can definitely come together, and they do in Texas. And I think that's what makes Texas so beautiful. What makes Texans so beautiful is we're blended. We can be where ideas come together instead of where ideas separate us and divide us. So, but to improve those numbers, we're going to have to start to look at this way, and it's going to be from a state of empowerment. We really believe that our voice has meaning and power as a constituency, as voters, and that we are willing to come together, have the conversation, so we can, because right now the world, it seems on a global level, it is calling for us to come together, not to divide further apart. This is a very critical time period we're in.
Sure it is, in a lot of ways.
Long answer.
I was going to say,
I need a hit after that one.
I was going to say that the one thing that I would have to ask, because, I ask everybody this when I have them on and we're talking about how to get more people involved and stuff. Because, for a lot of people, there's a fear factor. They fear, well, if I open my mouth, then I'm going to have to constantly look over my shoulder, and that's not true. It's completely and utterly not true. But, me saying it over and over again doesn't necessarily convince everybody. So what's your opinion on that? Do people have to worry about getting involved in the legislative process where cannabis is concerned?
On the legislative side, well, look, I'll tell you, I've actually faced this issue very personally in the past year. I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but there are legal repercussions for me in my personal life. Someone is willing to sling mud, right? But when you look at it from a legal perspective, no, there is no harm because you're participating in the legislative process.
Well, yeah.
And in fact, you're doing yourself more of a service because you're actually getting to know your legislators. And the reality is, I have to say, like, I worked for the Pentagon. I deployed. I was a journalist. I worked in national media. And I'm not saying it to be like, look at me, hey, I have a resume, but to be like industry that I learned the most about American history, American politics, and economics. National, and it wasn't the Department of Defense. This is where I learned what really makes the fabric of the reality that is the United States. And when you look at our economic policies and when you look at domestic policy and when you look at foreign policy, it is very much influenced by the things that we prohibit. So this is something worth examining. And if we're looking at the things that we prohibit, then we're looking at the law and the legislative process. So while it may seem on the surface to be just a bunch of stoners with like, hey man, why can't we smoke, bro? It's so much deeper than that. Like it's way deeper than that, my friends. It's a whole economy. It's a whole nother perspective of reality. And it'll help you to understand how all of this stuff actually works and how you build a nation in a way that I never expected. I'll tell you that much. I would have thought the other things, working in national media and the Pentagon, would have been my formal education. But in fact, it was cannabis, and that really that's where I got schooled. So I think for people who really want to participate in government and want to understand how this thing really works, how this machine comes together, then by all means, I challenge you to join us in this quest, because you're only going to get better. And the other thing is, it really touches, because I used to be, so after the Pentagon, I became a certified coach, and I was doing executive coaching out of New York for a while, and actually ghostwriting for a few coaches who are out there. But you sign an NDA, you don't get to reveal who you wrote for. But the reality is, if you really want to become a better version of yourself, and if you really think that this stuff is devolving into chaos a little bit, which it is, and you want to be prepared for whatever the hell is at the end of the tunnel, which hopefully for all of us is a little bit of light. If you want to get to that, then you have to be set on making yourself a better citizen and a better person all around. So it starts by challenging yourself. Just educate yourself, just participate. You don't even have to do it like it's, a senior thesis, or we don't even have to make it complicated. You just have to show up and say what you think. Educate yourself on the issues, and educate yourself on the reality of what the options are as far as what legislators can do. And then begin to participate and understand that this whole thing is a process. So it's going to take time to grow and develop, but that it's so worth it in the long haul. And at the end of it, at least for me, it's really given me, like, the military was one career, and I would have done 20 if I wouldn't have had to retire out. But I did my 13, but I really see my work with cannabis and psychedelics as the next 20-year career. And so it's going to be this next evolution of understanding how our nation operates. So I got to do it as a warfighter and a journalist, which is an interesting paradox. And now I'm getting to do it from this perspective. And I just think people are underestimating, like, what they're really capable of and what they can actually achieve, and how much change we can truly affect. But to affect any change at all, you have to show up at least just one time. You have to show up. That's it.
And-
One
and-
time.
Yeah.
And then the universe
Yeah.
will surprise you, and it will bring you the opportunities, but you got to show up.
And the thing that people don't understand is that show up can be as easy as a phone call to your legislator or an email.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean you have to travel to
Or the
Austin and
text.
visit
They
them.
even have texts.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's many, many ways. Listen, I feel like we could probably go on and on and on about the subject because we're both so passionate about it. But I wanted to say again, welcome to the collective. I speak for all of us, I'm sure, Austin and Lauren and Jesse and just everybody on the board. We're so glad to have you as part of our organization. Because of your energy, I feel like there's going to be a lot of good things to come in the future in terms of the veteran side of things, which we've kind of been trying to get things going that way and kind of hit a few roadblocks here and there. But I think we've got the person that's going to bring it on in for us. And I want to thank you for coming on and introducing yourself to our audience and our followers and everything. And are there any final words or any kind of plugs, like you want to plug your again, if people want to follow you and all that good stuff? Now's the time. Throw it out there.
Sure. You can follow me at Highly Informed. It's highly.informed, ENFORMED. And that's on Instagram. Otherwise, I'm Shaun Salvaje. I'm on LinkedIn. And I think, or you can follow the Texas Cannabis Collective. Just follow us there at TX Cannabis Collective on IG. And I think the number one thing that I'm looking forward to, I'm just so honored to have been asked to be on the board, especially as a veteran affairs director. And the thing I'm most forward to this year is bringing the team together and getting out there with that voice of enthusiasm and helping people to see that they actually can initiate change and they can initiate the change they want to see by embodying that change. So let's go do it. I think it's going to be a good year, and I'm really looking forward to it and seeing how much momentum we can build for the next legislative session. I think it'll be one worth watching and participating in.
I think you're 100% correct in that assumption. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining the collective. I see great things happening in the future. I really do.
Thank you. I'm really honored.
Well, with that, folks, I'm going to say that this is going to be the end of this show. If you like this show, be sure to join us again. We have lots of great guests, lots of people that come on and tell us their stories. If you happen to have a story, a cannabis success story, or you've got a new business out there in Texas or elsewhere, it doesn't have to be in Texas, and you want to get the public out there, knowledge about your business, and you get your story out there, reach out to us at txcanico.com and schedule an interview, and we'll be happy to have you on the show. With that being said, that's going to do it for this week, folks. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again next time.